So this week's artist, as you can kind of, we put in the agenda, as you can kind of guess, is the famous Japanese artist Hokusai.
Right. You can also see the poster back here, right?
Great.
Yeah.
And I know that, Jacques, you've been to Japan. I've been to Japan. It's just amazing when it's relatively a flat landscape, but particularly if you're taking that train, I forgot, from Tokyo to Osaka, I think.
Right.
And you look to the right, and it's just amazing how Mount Fuji just kind of rises up out of the ground.
You can see it literally from anywhere on the island. It's incredible.
So it's no wonder that Hokusai painted 36 views of Mount Fuji. And his art, especially another piece of art called The Wave, has really become an inspiration for many other artists, including my own daughter, who many years ago, I don't know if you can see this, did the wave on this birdhouse that she made.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she actually gave it some Japanese motifs here. So anyway, pretty cool. All right, so I like the origami. The origami on top, yes. So what particularly impressed me about this week's artist is actually his use of blue, and the importance of color to Japanese art scene in the 1830s in particular. So you might remember that Japan had closed its borders for several centuries to the outside world, except for actually the Dutch, I think. Right. And it was in, I think, in 1853 when Admiral Perry arrived in Japan, they opened up the country again. If you looked at the Japanese art from, I think, about the 1600s to the 1800s, most of the colors were natural colors like yellows, browns, greens, and red. You didn't really see any blue in any of their art. And so I want to just talk a little bit about kind of how blue came about, particularly what we now commonly refer to as Prussian blue. And so quite by accident, Prussian blue was discovered quite by accident in Berlin, actually. A dye maker was making a badge of it's a really interesting color. It's called cochineal red. It's a deep red color, which is actually made out of a microbe, a parasite off of cactus, but that's a whole other story. And it was used in fabric. The papacy, in terms of those red, deep cardinal robes, that's from the cochineal dye that still is being used today. Anyway, so there was a dye maker in Berlin that was going to make some cochineal dye for a fabric maker, and to help the dye adhere to the fabric, they will add potash. They just wood ashes to the cochineal, and that helps. It's a mordant. It helps it stick to the fabric. Somehow, the potash that he was using for this cochineal dye was contaminated with animal blood, at least so the story goes, right? And when the potash reacted with the blood, it made what's called potassium ferrocyanide. And the compound then reacted with some residual, it's a salt, iron sulfate, that was in the vat that the cochineal was in, and that created a ferrocyanide, which is a very deep blue color. It was originally called, I think, Berliner Blau. It's now commonly referred to as Prussian blue. It's a very unique type of blue. And so that color, when it arrived in Japan, actually it was such a bold color that it essentially reinvigorated back then what was their classic woodblock art, and which is one of Hokusai's main media in terms of his artwork. Right. All right, so
I think actually our scientists will appreciate the formula there, AJ. We have a lot of engineers. Yeah, we have a lot. Alan Berman is probably taking copious notes.
You can probably tell us the formula for the
no doubt. Yeah, no doubt.
So let's go on and move on to Sarah, who's going to show us some of Hokusai's art.
Hi, I'm very jealous of you both. Going to Japan has always been something on my bucket list. So one day, once we can, travel more freely. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Can everyone see this? Okay. So Katsushika Hokusai, or simply known as just Hokusai, was born in 1760 in Edo, Japan, which is now known as Tokyo. And he was born into a family of artisans. His father was the mirror maker to the shogun. And it's thought that his mother was maybe a concubine because he was not actually made an heir to his father. However, he still had a great relationship with his father and began painting at age 6, likely influenced by his father's artisan work and kind of growing up in that environment. At the age of 12, he was sent to work in a bookshop and a lending library, which was a popular institution in Japanese cities, where reading books made from woodcut blocks was actually a popular form of entertainment for the middle and upper classes at the time. At age 14, he began working for a woodcarver, and by 18 years old, he was admitted to train with Katsushika Hokusai, an ukiyo-e style artist that made woodblock prints and paintings, and would later become Hokusai's kind of art master. Ukiyo-e is a genre of Japanese art that was popular during this time. It was often produced as woodblock prints or paintings and depicted courtesans, kabuki actors, and sumo wrestlers. So Hokusai was known by at least 30 different names during his lifetime. And while the use of multiple names was a common practice of Japanese artists at the time, the number of pseudonyms of his were many more than other Japanese artists. His name changes were so frequent and so often related to changes in his artistic production and style that they're kind of used for breaking his life up into different periods and have helped historians date certain works of his. The name Hokusai is the name he used when he created his most famous series of art. It's called 36 Views of Mount Fuji, and all the pieces highlighted today are from that series. So this is the Great Wave off Kanagawa, and it's Hokusai's most famous print and arguably the most famous piece of art from Japan. As the series states, 36 Views of Mount Fuji, each piece in the series shows Mount Fuji from a different angle. So here we can see Mount Fuji in the background, and kind of since doing more research on this piece of art, I never really noticed the mountain in the background. The main spectacle is really this large wave and the turbulent seas off the shore of Kanagawa, a region just south of Tokyo. And the stature of the wave is further emphasized by the fishing boats that look like little toothpicks in the water. I would not want to be on one of those boats. But Hokusai uses math and scale to really change the perception of this piece, right? Even the iconic Mount Fuji looks tiny in comparison to this huge wave, which really makes the viewer feel like they're thrown into this print. And he also shows the wave right before it crashes. So there's this sense of almost chaotic movement. Like, we can all see the scene kind of play out when we look at it. We all know what happens when a wave rises, and then we can kind of finish it in our heads. Hokusai creates the movement with his varied use of color, particularly blues, as AJ was talking about. He often took inspiration from European artists, and Prussian blue was the chemically produced pigment that was introduced to Japan in the 1790s. And he uses blue throughout the series, but this piece in particular was an example of his proficiency with color. Oops, I went too far. So as compared to the Great Wave, where Mount Fuji is just kind of in the background, fine wind, clear morning, or fine wind, clear weather is dominated by the cone of Mount Fuji. And what's unique is that it's shown in a deep red earth tone, which is a rare sight that only occurs on some autumn mornings when the air is clear and there is a southerly wind, hence the name of this piece. And I really like the simplicity of this piece. There are no people in it, just the landscape, and it's very balanced in color with the blues and the green against the red, and there's just something very calm and peaceful about it. So this is Thunderstorm Beneath the Summit. And we can see the landscape of this piece is pretty similar to Fine Wind, Clear Morning, but with a different atmosphere. Here we can see the two images side by side. And Thunderstorm Beneath the Summit is almost a marriage between some of the texture techniques in the Great Wave and then the landscape of Fine Wind, Clear Morning. And the contours of this piece are more defined. There's more of kind of an ominous tone over Mount Fuji. And again, Hokusai uses that Prussian blue in the color of the sky. So on the left of this slide is a depiction of travelers in Ijiri-juku of the Sugura province. And I apologize if I'm pronouncing any of these names wrong. But Ijiri-juku was the 18th of 53 rest stations along the Tokaido, which was one of the main 5 routes throughout Japan in the Edo period. And the Tokaido Highway, also known as the Eastern Sea Route, was the most important of them all. Here we can see a cloudless Mount Fuji, probably blown away. All the clouds were blown away by the wind. And the travelers hold on to their hats. They lose their papers as the wind rips through this path. And the frantic movements in the foreground contrast with the stillness of the mountain in the distance. This kind of reminds me of the crazy wind we've been having in Southern California lately. And on the right, we can see the celebrated kimono shop of the Mitsui family, which was located on Edo's busiest street, Tsurugacho. Mount Fuji is glimpsed from kind of a high vantage point above the street between the two buildings. And the triangular profile of the roof is echoed in the shape of the mountain. So Umezawa was the place at the lower part of Mount Fuji. And Hokusai added 5 cranes to the landscape to kind of just bring out the whole image. You can see the mist hangs over the blue. We have more blues in this, the blue Mount Fuji and the red crowned cranes. The mist and the kind of almost pinky color of the clouds represents the moments just before daybreak. And as well, according to the Japanese tradition, Mount Fuji and the cranes are meant to represent good fortune. And if we look on the slide as well, we can see similarities with James Audubon's painting of a whooping crane from 1827. And if you recall, I mentioned James Audubon in our New Orleans art talk. He was an ornithologist and a historian from New Orleans. And personally, this has to be one of my favorites that we've talked about today. This is called Fuji from Gotenyama at Shinagawa, and Shinagawa was another of the rest stations along the Tokaido. And this picture represents the arrival of spring. So Gotenyama Hill at Shinagawa was known for its beautiful cherry blossoms during the Edo period. And still today, Japan is renowned for its cherry blossoms in the spring. This is one of the only prints that Hokusai did about cherry blossoms in the series of the 36 woodcuts. And actually, the immediate success of these 36 prints led to another 10 being made, which are still included in the larger series of 36 views of Mount Fuji, even though I guess you could say it's 46 views of Mount Fuji. And this piece is one of the additional 10. So overall, Hokusai was among the first artists to be shaped by and to shape globalization, drawing from international influences and later really being embraced by European artists who borrowed his decorative motifs, his practice of working in series, and his vision of contemporary society. And to this day, he's one of Japan's most famous and globally influential artists.